The coffee machine made a noise that sounded like it was reconsidering its life choices, which, honestly, was relatable. I stared at it, waiting for something resembling coffee to emerge, but instead it hissed like an offended snake and went silent. "Great," I muttered, betrayed by technology again. "Classic. You rely heavily on primitive machinery for emotional stability." I didn't scream. I want that on record. What I did was a controlled, dignified flinch followed by an extremely reasonable spin toward the voice. "Okay," I said, pointing at the empty space near my couch. "Who said that?" I did. She was just there. No dramatic entrance, no glowing portal, no polite knock. One moment my apartment was mine, and the next it was. She stood near the window, perfectly still, like she had been placed there rather than having walked in. At first glance she looked human, too precise maybe, like a sculpture trying to pass as a person. Then my brain caught up and fixated on the detail that refused to fit: her ears. Long, elegant, curving slightly upward, like they belonged to a story I hadn't read yet. "Right," I said slowly. "So either I've finally lost it, or you're very real and I need to start making better life decisions." "I am real," she replied, her tone calm, almost clinical. "Your life decisions remain statistically questionable." I stared at her. "Wow, you break into my home and insult me immediately. That's efficient." "I did not break anything," she said, glancing briefly at the door as if checking its structural integrity. "Your entry point remains intact. That's not the part people usually focus on." She tilted her head slightly, studying me with an intensity that made me suddenly aware of how messy my apartment was. "You are not reacting as expected." "What's expected? Screaming, fainting, throwing a shoe?" I looked around. "I could throw a shoe if that helps." "That would not improve the situation." "Good, because I like those shoes." There was a pause, not an awkward one, more like she was processing something, running calculations behind those steady eyes. Then she stepped forward and I noticed how precise her movements were, like gravity was more of a suggestion to her than a rule. "I require your attention," she said. "You already have it," I replied. "Against my will, but still." Her gaze locked onto mine and something about it shifted the air in the room. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it wasn't harmless either. It felt important, heavy in a way I couldn't explain. "You have been selected," she said. I blinked. "Selected for what? Jury duty, because I ignored those letters. This is not a civic obligation." "Shame, I was really hoping for paperwork." She ignored that, rude. "Your cognitive patterns meet the necessary criteria." That sounds fake, but also vaguely insulting. "It is neither." "Great, that clears it up completely." She took another step closer, and I resisted the urge to step back, mostly because I didn't want to look like I was losing a staring contest with someone who might not even blink. "Listen," I said, "I don't know what's going on, but if this is about money, I don't have any. If it's about saving the world, I'm probably not your guy. I can barely save my coffee." "You underestimate your relevance," she said. "I've been told I overestimate it, actually. This is new." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, she said, "Explain barely save my coffee." I stared at her, then pointed at the machine. "That traitor hasn't worked properly in weeks." She followed my gesture, examining the coffee machine like it was an alien artifact, which, I guess, from her perspective, it was. She leaned slightly closer, her long ears shifting subtly as if responding to something I couldn't hear. "It is inefficient," she concluded. "Wow, bold take." "I can repair it." I narrowed my eyes. "You're telling me you show up out of nowhere, say I've been selected for something mysterious, and your first helpful act is fixing my coffee machine?" "Yes, I'm listening." She extended her hand toward the machine without touching it. For a second, nothing happened. Then there was a soft hum, barely audible, like the air itself was vibrating. The machine clicked, whirred, and then, miracle of miracles, began to brew. I watched, stunned, as actual coffee poured out. "Okay," I said slowly. "That's either incredibly advanced technology or I'm dreaming and my brain has very specific priorities." It is not a dream, she said. Yeah, you keep saying that. I grabbed the cup, took a cautious sip, and froze. That's actually good. I optimized its function. I looked at her, then at the coffee, then back at her. All right. Hypothetically, if I were to believe you, and I'm not saying I do, but let's pretend, what exactly have I been selected for? Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened, almost imperceptibly. The air shifted again, that same weight pressing in heavier now. This interaction is not random, she said. There is a decision that must be made. By me, I guessed. Yes, of course it is. I took another sip of coffee because if reality was going to fall apart, I might as well be caffeinated. And what happens if I say no? You cannot. I raised an eyebrow. That's not very comforting. It is not meant to be. Well, great, now I'm reassured. She stepped even closer, close enough that I could see the faint, almost unnatural clarity in her eyes. They didn't just look at me. They analyzed, measured, understood in a way that made me feel like I was being read line by line. You will choose, she said quietly. Between what? For the first time she hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was there. Then her gaze sharpened, locking onto mine with a focus that made everything else fade into the background. Choose carefully, human. I held the coffee like it was the only stable thing left in the universe, which, given the circumstances, felt like a reasonable emotional decision. All right, I said, squinting at her, you can't just drop a line like that and then go silent. That's not how conversations work. That's how cliffhangers work. I am not familiar with cliffhangers, she replied. Figures. You seem more like a deliver existential dread efficiently type. She ignored that again. I was starting to think ignoring me was part of her culture. The decision requires context, she said. Good, I love context, big fan. Please overwhelm me. She took a slow step back as if creating space for something unseen. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shimmered, not dramatically, not like in movies, but subtly, like heat bending light. Lines of faint luminescence formed between us, intersecting, folding, expanding into something that resembled a structure made of pure information. I leaned slightly to the side. Okay, that's new. It is a projection, she said. Yeah, I gathered that part. I meant the whole my living room is now a science fiction documentary situation. The glowing structure shifted, reshaping into something that looked disturbingly like a map, except it wasn't of any place I recognized. Points of light pulsed across it, connected by threads that moved as if they were alive. This represents intersecting spatial domains, she said. Ah, I nodded. Of course it does. I was just about to say that. You were not. Let me have this. She gestured toward one cluster of lights and it brightened. This is your world. Looks smaller than I expected. It is not to scale. Still offended. Another cluster flared into view, overlapping slightly with the first. The threads between them tightened, vibrating with a faint intensity that made my skin prickle. And that, she continued, is mine. I stared at it, then at her. You couldn't just visit, you had to bring a whole diagram. This is necessary for your comprehension. Bold assumption. She ignored that too. I was keeping count now. The boundaries between these domains are destabilizing, she said. They were never meant to intersect in this manner. Okay, I said slowly, so fix it. It is not that simple. It never is. She moved her hand and the threads between the two clusters twisted, some snapping apart, others fusing in ways that looked wrong. Even without understanding it, I could tell it wasn't good. This convergence will result in one of several outcomes, she said. Let me guess. None of them involve me going back to worrying about my coffee machine. Correct. I miss those simpler times. She focused on me again, that same weight settling in her gaze. One outcome leads to mutual stabilization. Both domains adapt, coexist, and evolve. That sounds surprisingly nice. It carries significant risk. Of course it does. Another outcome results in complete separation. The domains sever all connections, which means you would never encounter my kind again. I took a sip of coffee, considering that. That's not entirely a downside. She tilted her head slightly. You would also lose access to any benefits of interaction, like fixing my appliances. Yes, I hesitated. Okay, that one hurts. She continued, her tone unchanged. The final outcome is domination. Domination, I repeated. That sounds bad already. One domain asserts control over the other. The result is irreversible. Define control. Your species would not retain autonomy. Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of that. It is statistically the most efficient resolution. Efficient for who? She didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair, and somehow this all comes down to me. Yes, because of my cognitive patterns, I said, making air quotes with my free hand. Yes, that still sounds fake. It is measurable. Great. Love being measurable. The projection shifted again, the threads tightening, the light pulsing faster now, like a countdown I couldn't hear but could definitely feel. You will influence which outcome manifests, she said. How? Through your decision. That is not an explanation. It is sufficient. It's really not. She stepped closer again, and I noticed something different this time, not in her appearance, not in the obvious ways, but in the subtle ones. There was a tension there, faint but real, like she wasn't as detached as she pretended to be. You are resisting the process, she said. I'm processing the process, I corrected. Big difference. You are attempting to reduce uncertainty with humor. I shrugged. It's either that or panic, and I feel like I'm doing a great job so far. She studied me for a moment, then said, Your strategy is unexpectedly effective. I blinked. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. I'm counting it. For a brief second, just a second, I thought I saw something shift in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but something close enough to make me question it. Then it was gone. The decision cannot be delayed indefinitely, she said. Good, because I wasn't planning to put it on my to-do list. You will need to trust the information provided. That's a big ask, I said. You show up out of nowhere, tell me the fate of everything depends on me, and then expect me to just go along with it. Yes. I stared at her. You're very direct. It is efficient. Yeah, you mentioned that. I'm starting to think your whole species is just really into efficiency and not at all into emotional comfort. Emotional comfort is not a priority. Shocking. The projection dimmed slightly, as if responding to the shift in the conversation. The threads were still there, still moving, still unstable. I looked at it, then back at her. What would you choose? Her gaze flickered just for a moment. I am not permitted to answer that. Convenient. It is a constraint. Still convenient. Silence settled between us, heavier this time. Not awkward, not empty. Just full of everything neither of us was saying. I took another sip of coffee, now lukewarm but still somehow the most normal thing in the room. You said I was selected for a reason, I said. Something about improbable empathy. Yes. So you're telling me this whole thing comes down to whether I can, understand you, partially. And you? I asked. Do you understand me? She didn't answer right away. Her long ears shifted slightly, a small, almost imperceptible movement that I was starting to recognize as something. I am attempting to, she said finally. Good, I replied. Because if I'm making a decision that affects both our worlds, I'd really prefer not to do it alone. Her eyes met mine again, steady, focused, but this time there was something else there. Not just expectation, not just calculation, something closer to uncertainty. And for some reason, that made all of this feel a lot more real. I set the empty coffee cup down like it was part of a ritual I didn't understand but didn't want to interrupt. All right, I said, looking at the shifting projection, then back at her. No more vague statements. If I'm deciding the fate of two worlds, I want the full version. No mysterious pauses, no dramatic eye contact. Well, maybe less dramatic eye contact. My ocular focus is within standard parameters, she said. It feels aggressive. It is not intended to be. Good, because it's working anyway. The glowing threads between the two clusters pulsed faster now, the faint hum in the air deepening like something vast was leaning closer, waiting. You already understand the outcomes, she said. I understand the labels, I corrected. Not the reality. Coexistence sounds nice until you add significant risk. Separation sounds safe until you realize it's basically cosmic ghosting. And domination is just a terrible idea all around. That assessment is accurate. Thank you. I feel very validated right now. She stepped closer again, and this time I didn't step back. Progress, I guess. The risk of coexistence, she said, is mutual vulnerability. Both species would be exposed to variables they cannot fully predict. Translation, we might mess each other up. Yes. And separation. Stability through isolation. No further interaction. No shared advancement. Translation, we stay safe but we stay stuck. Yes. I nodded slowly. And domination is just one side wins, the other loses everything. Yes. Wow, I exhaled. Really narrowed it down to 3 terrible choices. There are no perfect outcomes, she said. Yeah, I've noticed that's a trend in life. The projection flickered, the threads tightening again, and for a moment I felt something. Not physically, not exactly, but like a pressure behind my thoughts, a sense that this wasn't just a visual. It was real, it was happening. I looked at her. You said you can't choose. Yes, but you have an opinion. She was silent for a fraction too long. That is not relevant, she said. It is to me. It should not influence your decision. It already does, I replied. You're part of this, whether your rules say it or not. She studied me again, that same precise focus, but now I could see it clearly. The hesitation, the uncertainty. You are deviating from expected patterns, she said. Good, I said, because your expectations seem very limiting. Another pause, then quietly she said, coexistence requires trust. I smiled slightly. That sounded a lot like an opinion. She didn't respond. I let out a slow breath, running a hand through my hair again. You know, a few hours ago, my biggest problem was a broken coffee machine. It is no longer broken, she said. Yeah, I nodded. And somehow that feels like the least important part of my day now. Silence settled again, but it wasn't as heavy this time, just real. I looked at the projection, at the 2 clusters of light, so close but not quite touching, the threads between them unstable, uncertain. You don't understand us, I said. That is correct. And we definitely don't understand you. That is also correct. So the logical solution, I continued, is to keep our distance, avoid the risk, stay in our own separate corners of the universe. Yes, but that's also the safe choice, I added. And safe doesn't mean right. She didn't respond, but her ears shifted slightly, that subtle movement I had started to notice more and more. And domination, I went on, that's just fear dressed up as control. That's not even a real option. It is the most stable outcome. For one side, I said, at the cost of everything else. Her gaze didn't waver. I sighed, then laughed quietly. You know what's funny? What? I'm not qualified for this. That is irrelevant. It really is. I can't even decide what to eat half the time, and now I'm deciding the fate of 2 worlds. You have demonstrated consistent decision-making patterns under uncertainty. Have I? Yes. I thought about that, then shook my head. Or maybe I just make choices and deal with the consequences later. That is also a valid interpretation. Great. Love that for me. I looked at her again, really looked this time. Not just the obvious differences, the ears, the precision, the way she held herself, but the smaller things. The way she hesitated before certain answers, the way she had tried and failed to understand humor, the way she had fixed my coffee machine without being asked. You're scared too, aren't you? I said. Her expression didn't change, but the silence that followed was answer enough. This isn't just a mission for you, I continued. It matters. Yes, she said quietly, and you don't know if I'll make the right choice. No, good, I said. Because I don't know either. For the first time, that almost smile appeared again, faint, uncertain, but real. Then you understand the situation, she said. Yeah, I nodded. I think I do. I turned back to the projection, to the two worlds on the edge of something irreversible. Coexistence, I said. The word hung there for a second, like the universe itself was listening. You have made your decision, she said. I have, I replied. Not because it's safe, not because it's guaranteed to work, but because it's the only option that gives both sides a chance. The threads between the clusters reacted instantly, shifting, stabilizing, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. The pulsing slowed, the chaotic movement easing into something more balanced. The hum in the air softened. It will not be easy, she said. I didn't expect it to be. There will be conflict. Of course there will. There will be loss. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, probably. She watched me for a moment longer, then said, You have altered the trajectory of both domains. No pressure, right? That was not intended as humor. Everything is humor if you're stressed enough. Another brief pause, then unexpectedly she said, I am glad it was you. I blinked. That definitely sounded like an opinion. It was, she admitted. I smiled. Careful. You're getting less efficient. And you are becoming more decisive, she replied. Don't get used to it. The projection began to fade, the light dissolving into nothing, the hum disappearing with it. The room felt normal again. Or at least as normal as it could after everything that had just happened. I looked around, then back at her. So what now? Now, she said, the process begins. That sounds ominous. It is accurate. I sighed, then laughed quietly. You know, I think I preferred when my biggest problem was coffee. She glanced at the machine, then back at me. It remains functional. Well, I said, grabbing the cup and taking a sip, at least we've got that going for us. She watched me for a moment, then, very slightly, tilted her head in that almost familiar way. And for the first time since she